Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Clara Deck. I support communications here in NOAA's Climate Program Office. Thank you for joining today's webinar in our series, NOAA Fire Research from Conditions to Impacts. This is hosted by NOAA's Climate Program Office in partnership with NOAA's Fire Observation Research and Services Team, or FOREST. Today's presentations will focus on improving wildfire risk tools. Today we'll hear two great presentations. First, we'll hear about the burn period tracker, which helps fire managers to quickly access specific local humidity information used to assess risk. And we'll hear from Dan Ferguson and Mike Crimmins from the University of Arizona. Next, we'll hear about the red flag warning, which is a National Weather Service tool for alerting the fire management community to real-time and imminent risk levels. And on that, we'll hear from Tamara Wall from the Desert Research Institute and Scott Stearns and Maddie Eideker from NOAA National Weather Service. So during the webinar, at any point, please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A feature down there at the center of the bottom of your screen. If you also feel comfortable doing so, please indicate your affiliation with your question so that we may let the speakers know who is asking. Hannah Campbell is here from the Climate Program Office, and she will facilitate the Q&A sessions after each presentation. So with that, first, we are going to hear from Dan Ferguson and Mike Crimmins.
Well, thanks, Claire, for having us. I appreciate the invitation to talk about this work. So I'm going to kick off and then hand it off to my colleague, Mike. So I'm Dan Ferguson from the University of Arizona. I'm the Climate Assessment for the Southwest program. And I want to acknowledge that all this work was funded by the Climate Adaptation Partnership, the NOAA CAP RISA program, which is in the Climate Program Office, through CLIMAS here at the University of Arizona and New Mexico State University. And just very briefly, CLIMAS is a group that's been here funded by NOAA since 1998. And we are focused in Arizona and New Mexico, and we work with local communities to integrate various perspectives, interests of communities in this region on issues related to climate, where science is needed, and we can help kind of solve problems. So what we're after is developing actionable knowledge, and that's going to underpin what Mike and I are going to talk about. I also would acknowledge that in the stuff that we're going to talk about today, the burn period tracker and the lead up to it, our colleagues Chuck Maxwell and George Friswold were also active contributors, and I'll talk about Chuck a bit in a minute. So I just want to be clear that this is actually not really much of a science talk, my part of it, because I really just want to tell you the story of how we kind of got to where we got to. Having said that, there is quite a bit of research that underpins what we are going to present here. And so if you're interested, these are the 3 papers so far that have come out of the work that Mike and I are going to talk about. So I have 2 short parts I'm going to talk about, and then Mike is going to pick it up from there. So the first part is this kind of reality check. And going into this project, again, this was funded by CPO through the CAP-RISA program in CLIMAS. We had this set of assumptions, and this picture is from the Bighorn Fire, which was in the Catalina Mountains, just north of Tucson in 2020. This was our most recent large fire. So we assumed that there was essentially that there was value to weather and climate information that practitioners of wildfire management in the Southwest were using. Safe assumption that there's some value of that information. So George Friswold, who's a resource economist who was leading this project at the time, he does this kind of analysis, like put quantifiable value on information and tools. This is a very reasonable assumption. So that's what we started with. We assumed these are high stakes decisions. This is, the information that is produced by our community and across the kind of climate weather enterprise. Obviously, this stuff has value. Let's go understand what that is. So those were our starting assumptions. From the very beginning, we knew we wanted to talk to regional experts that weren't us, regional fire experts. I should say I'm a qualitative scientist. So my training is in social science, understanding how people use information, that kind of thing. Mike is an applied climatologist. George is a resource economist, and I'm going to talk about Chuck in a second. So we initially, we knew we needed to talk to people who knew more about fire than we do. So as it happens, I was the co-author of a paper with Tim Brown, who's also on this panel today, in 2012, so quite a long time ago. We looked at the network of fire information or weather and climate information in our region. And we did a social network analysis. And then analysis, this is one of the figures from it. This is the sort of who's involved in fire management in the practitioner community. And we identified one kind of key character in the flow of information and weather and climate information for fire practitioners in our region. And that guy was Chuck Maxwell. So it turns out like this analysis that we did in 2012, like kind of literally pointed to Chuck and his colleague at the time, Rich Naden, as like, if you wanted to figure out, what's going on with, what do you need for weather and climate in fire, you went to Chuck. And so I was like, we were like, we should just talk to Chuck before we start on this value information study. So we did that. So one of the first things we did, this is the second part here of my little bit, we needed to broaden our perspective, right? So it's like, Chuck, who uses this stuff? What do they do? Like how, if we're going to understand the value of it, we need to figure out who can we talk to? So again, back to this analysis we did in 2012, there's all this list of categories, right? These are the people who consume this information at the time that Chuck was helping to produce as a regional meteorologist working within fire. So we followed Chuck's lead on this, and he put us in touch with lots of folks in the region. And so we started a kind of reoriented what we were thinking about, and we made up what amounts to a mixed method study, social science study, and we started with qualitative data collection. So in 2021, right before the fire season, we did a series of interviews and focus groups with a total of 12 regional fire experts. That sounds like a small sample, but in this region, it turns out because of Chuck, we wound up with 12 pretty key people in our region. So I'm just going to hit you with a couple of highlights here. There's published work. You can read more about this if you'd like. So one of the things we learned was that, hey, maybe there's too much stuff in terms of information and tools. So this quote kind of illustrates that. This is a fire practitioner saying there's just so much information, so many independently graded applications or data sources, it's nearly impossible for one person to be familiar with everything, identify what's best or what suits their need or purpose. So that was, this is a well-known fact, but to us, it was like important to kind of hear it directly from the folks that we were going to work with. Like maybe there's too much stuff. Another thing we learned was that forecasts specifically, and then just generally science-based information within this community, there may be some credibility issues. And so we asked questions in our interviews and focus groups about what if you had a perfect forecast? Like, what would you do? What would you do differently if you had a perfect forecast? Kind of surprisingly, the answer was like, I don't know, not much. And the reason turns out, this quote kind of illustrates it, even if there was such a thing as a perfect forecast, you would never get anyone in the field to believe you. The skepticism about weather forecasting, fire behavior modeling, climate products, everything is so high that unless it's proven perfect, or super reliable consistently, our folks are just not going to believe you. Okay, so right, this is one person saying this, but that's pretty eye-opening. Like, okay, maybe there's a credibility issue here. So that's the second thing we learned. This is from the qualitative data. So then we did a large end survey. So in our region, we had a total relevant population, people who can answer, were relevant to the questions we were asking. It's about 477 people. We wound up with a response rate of 206 respondents with a response rate of 43%, which is actually quite high for a social science study, especially an online survey. We did pretty well with this. So we asked about a whole suite of weather and climate information sources, all the stuff we could drum up that we knew people were using, we thought people were using. So again, the details of that analysis in this paper at the bottom there, but what we found in the very simple terms is most of the people we surveyed don't really use most of the stuff that we asked about. And most of the people, or most of those sources are not used to directly inform decisions. So that sort of blew up our whole idea of like, can we really understand the value of this information, because we were kind of seeing like, boy, that's going to be hard to do if a lot of it's not getting used, and maybe there's not that much sort of quantifiable value of that. So that kind of reoriented what we're doing. So we had all this social science data to work with, the qualitative stuff, which is pretty rich, this huge data set from the quantitative, the survey. So to make sense of that, we spent, and I should say our team was the folks, so Mike, who's about to talk, Chuck, George, me, we spent a long time kind of sorting through this data to try to make sense of what are we hearing here? Like, what do we see in this pattern? And like, how does it help us as a group who's meant to develop, science that's useful for people? Like, what are we going to take from this? So one of the things we learned was that we were asking the wrong question. I'm pretty confident in this. We shouldn't have started off with the what's the value of this information. The reason is we didn't know a bunch of stuff. One thing we didn't know was we really didn't understand how the information is used at all and who it's used by. So that is pretty key. And we have learned a lot since then about who uses it and why. This idea of credibility of the information is incredibly critical. I think it's smart to understand that across, it's not just in Wildfire, but if you're going to be a scientist producing stuff and trying to help people inform decisions, credibility is pretty high. You need to understand, are you a credible source or not? And then, the specific characteristics and the tools and the data that are used, like what makes the things that people do, because people do use a lot of stuff, obviously, but so what is it about those things that are useful? So that little lesson learned was really helpful for us as a group because it really helped reorient us. We're still working on, our group is still active. We have new projects we're doing. So this exercise in starting with one question, evolving to a new set of questions, was really helpful for us. And a really key thing we learned, and this is kind of a no-brainer for probably Tamara and Tim for sure, if you want to do something useful and introduce it into a high-stakes decision community like Wildfire, you got to identify a champion. In our case, we had Chuck Maxwell as our champion. He's an active member he was at the time an active member of the fire community, as providing, like I said, a reliable source of information for these folks for years. And boy, was he has been and remains key to this entire enterprise. So that, for a research group like ours based at the university, having somebody in the business as he was really completely changed what we were able to do. Okay, so I'm going to hand this off to Mike. So the idea here is that was all the story of how we got to the tool that Mike's about to talk about, which is the burn period tracker.
Thanks, Dan. And I'm really glad. So the title of this talk is the burn period tracker, but the burn period tracker is kind of secondary to the story because I think the story is the most interesting part. The tool is an emergent property from this relationship. And us getting together and connecting with Chuck, and Chuck was working at that point. He's since retired from his position with the Southwest GAC, Geographic Area Coordination Center. But we spent a long time, a couple of years in weekly meetings learning from each other. And this tool really was his idea. And us going through all of these existing information sources and trying to puzzle out how people may have been using them, how they're interpreting them, how we may have interpreted them. This idea of the burn period tracker came up with our discussions with Chuck of what are simple tools that point at information sources that are already trusted. And so as Dan illustrated, fire managers are juggling many, many different indices. And so anything that fits into their existing heuristics probably has a high chance of success. And so Chuck would talk about that fire behavior analysts would use the hours per day, just the simple count of hours per day of less than 20% relative humidity to flag an active burning window. So you can think about this on a daily basis. Do you have a long window or a short window, just based on that simple threshold? And it was surprised to us is that was actually being hand calculated from the RAWS station that a particular analyst may have been using. So it seemed like an opportunity to try to push on this a little bit. And so again, the burn period is simply that. It's just a local count of hours each day with relative humidity below 20%. And if you look in the literature, there's not a lot on burn period as a concept or a topic, but you can find it buried in some old studies from Rocky Mountain Research Station. You can find it in some of the National Wildfire Coordinating Group guidance materials and training materials, and it connects back to 1 hour fuel. So it's a real kind of simple metric to connect back to 1 hour fuel status and connects with some of the existing heuristics and rules that are already in the training guides. And down here, and Chuck and I were kind of going back and forth and looking in the literature, it really aligns with the moisture of extinction values for fine fuels common down here in the Southwest. I think it has value outside of the Southwest, and Tim's group has actually expanded this, to my knowledge, to other parts of the West. I think there's still real good research opportunities to maybe tune that threshold for different areas and for different applications, but that 20% is what we're running with right now. And the tool is real simple. I coded it up in R, and it runs on a cron job script on a virtual machine each night, goes and grabs data from the RAWS stations across the Southwest, does some simple math, and then creates a simple web page, posts it, and that's it. So it's real lightweight, real portable. The code's all open if anybody wants to peek at it. We're utilizing the new Fire Environment Management System API that went live this fall, and we haven't had any trick with that. I think one of the value adds that we brought to this was, as an applied climatologist, was doing some climatology in the background. So we've calculated climatological metrics that the current burn period is plotted on top of. And finally, this was one of our analysts who we were engaging with and we were designing the tool said, hey, it'd be pretty easy to go grab the 7-day forecast, wasn't it? It was like, oh yeah, we could totally do that. And it's actually easily available through the FEMS API now. So we plot not only from January 1st up to present, the daily burn period at each one of these stations, but we also go and grab the National Digital Forecast Database NDFD value for that raw station and plot out the 7-day forecast. So that has been pretty popular. So our understanding is that it has made a difference and has been useful to the analysts that we've been working with and the fire meteorologists across the Southwest. And again, as Dan said, having a champion, Chuck was working while we put this out, and he was really the champion of trying to help interpret, tweak, get the information out to other people. And it's been useful. We have evidence of it being used for staffing, prescribed burn timing, and public messaging. Again, I think the value of the plots themselves with the climatological context allows you to look at the interseasonal trends. And down here, a real strong connection to the onset of the monsoon. And so burn period and fire season window actually can extend into July or retreat into June. And we can see that on the burn period plots as we go through that part of the season. Did a couple of things here and put together, there's a little link down here, is an interactive app where you can go and look at burn period for any of the RAWs in the US and play with that threshold and do a little bit of exploration on the data in case that's of interest to start trying to see how it performs in your local area. So again, just to wrap it up, these kind of key takeaways, we think, and we learned from that kind of earlier part of the study, which was really the core study, and this was an emergent tool that came out of that it distills that complex weather data into an intuitive, actionable metric that fits with those heuristics that analysts were already using. And it does complement the traditional fire weather indices. It doesn't replace it. It's not a silver bullet. It correlates really highly with some of the other ones. But again, I think that concept of everybody getting trained up on what relative humidity is and then just doing the simple count during the day allows you to real quickly grab what that might mean for a particular location. And then bringing in that climatological context gives you a little bit of sense of whether you're in kind of uncharted territory in a particular season or there's some timing issues as well. So the tool link is right there, and the paper that Dan had posted as well as earlier. This is a direct link to that Journal of Applied Meteorology and Climatology that goes in a little more detail of what we did. So I'll stop there, and I think I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I really appreciated this presentation. We've already got a question here. And let me remind anybody who has questions, if you want to share your affiliation, if you think that's going to be helpful for the context of the question, please feel free to do so. The first question we have is, have you been analyzing, and actually I was thinking of this as well, the uptake of the tracker, as in how many people are using it and how often?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's kind of the next phase. We have Google Analytics, and we have hundreds of users, which we assume are in the Southwest and related to the GAC. And you can see a seasonality with the uptake as well. So in it, quiet time of the year, people aren't looking at it too much. We have people checking it every day, and then it ramps up as the fire season ramps up here in the Southwest.
We do have a follow-on study that is our colleague Tristan O'Mara is working on, looking at a suite of different tools, things we've made and things other people have made. And she is tracking on the developer side, how was it developed? How was the engagement working? If it was, we engaged. And then she's also looking at the consumer side. So the burn period tracker is part of that suite of 6 projects or 6 tools that she's examining. So we will eventually be publishing on that as well.
Okay, and we have a couple questions, including putting out the links to the papers that are in the presentations. And I think we do post the presentations, so the links that are in the presentations will be there as well. And then another question we have is, do you find that end users want to see observations and station data more rather than gridded products, particularly for forecasts?
This has been really an interesting part of the project, and I think Dan will chime in here too. In the fire, and again, we're outsiders and we're trying to learn as much as we can, but in the fire community, my understanding is that the RAWS stations, those fire weather stations, are really, really critical, and managers have relationships with those stations. And so I think that that was one of the strengths of us focusing on the RAWS themselves, is that it does go right down to the station. And we've already had conversations with some managers of, that RAWS station's got problems, and we wouldn't know, but he's like, but I can see past those problems and still use the burn period. But I just wanted you guys to know. And so there is conversations. The gridded data are another level, and I think that there is some distrust, and I think there's probably work to be done in that area as well.
This is my question, but as you think about those things, are the relationships that you've built, do you feel like you have the capacity to then articulate those issues and have a conversation and be, contributing to communicating those elements, or maybe they've already been communicated?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's learning in both directions, right? Like, because these stations are real stations, and they actually drive some of the gridded data, and so they are more sort of first order than the gridded data. So us learning about where those stations are, what are the issues, the people maintain these stations, helps me understand the gridded data a little bit better so that we can communicate back out. So it's not a pedantic thing where you're kind of like, we need to explain to them. It's more like, oh, that's how that data works, so that I can understand how the data set that I'm familiar with was. So it's a conversation more than a training opportunity, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a lot of questions. I'll get to more of these. Have you been using any satellite data for burn conditions or for air quality? Any interest in using satellite data for operational metrics?
Yeah, I'm not a fire meteorologist. I'm an applied climatologist trying to help out. I think that community is inundated with those data already, and so this was an effort to actually meet them where they're at and to try to wade through some of that. I think those are really powerful tools, but I think that we're trying to figure out which of those products in which instances and in which locations helps them make the best decisions. I think those are all really powerful tools, though.
Okay, and then is there any interest in using WX models to extend out a day or more, say with RRHR?
I'm not sure which
Maybe
model?
we can get clarification on that. If that questioner can send us a little bit more information.
We're already looking at I think there's real opportunity to try to look at the gridded forecast elements right now, because that's what we're using right now to actually at the RAWS sites forecast out the 7 days. We're using the National Weather Service gridded product to that, and we've done some real preliminary analysis, and there's some bias correction opportunities and some opportunities to probably tighten that up a little bit.
Okay, and we're doing a little pivot here, but in your interactions with end users, did anything frustrating appear as far as trusted data is concerned? You said there's too much stuff, but is there anything specifically that you identified for data that would be very helpful that is not readily available?
Mike, do you want to take a swing at that? I mean, I have thoughts, but
I was going to hope you go for it. Yeah, go for it.
So nothing specific comes to mind. That qualitative data we collected, gosh, it was a few years back now. What I would generally say, and maybe this isn't quite a response, but what I would generally say is that I think there's a lot of skepticism in some of these tools and data sources. And I think that if you're going to develop new stuff, I mean, that your best bet is to understand that at the outset, because I think if you want uptake of stuff, I think you have to really get a handle on who's using it and how. And again, the thing that we didn't understand and we are now actively working on is what are the decisions that are being made? Like if you're trying to inform a decision, you're flying blind if you're just like throwing stuff out there. And we're guilty of this. Like we have totally done this, but it's aware. I'm aware now of like, okay, maybe there's more work to be done to understand exactly what you're doing. Because for this, again, high stakes stuff, right? It's like just flooding the zone is not helping. It's my take on this whole suite of projects. We're flooding the zone in a way that's maybe counterproductive.
And that question came from Dave Jones at the Storm Center Communications and co-chair ESIP Wildfire Cluster, just FYI. But also, I think your story is so specific and really good in terms of telling that whole story of how you took the social science, and not that it was linear, but understood that opportunity and found that champion and were able to understand how to make something that was usable and useful without necessarily going in immediately and saying, we have information, it's useful to you, and we're going to create a tool that you're going to use, which I think you all already knew, but it just, you have the elements that created the capacity for you to also analyze that process, which is very helpful in communicating those needs in the future. So I think we have time for a few more questions because you all were very efficient in your presentation. The next one is, any effort to include Mesonet stations in Texas and Oklahoma who have few RAWS stations?
We actually have had a couple of conversations with Chuck and some of the other fire behavior analysts working at the national level who are now connecting with states. There has been some conversation. We may end up reaching out to Texas Predictive Services and just seeing if there's interest in trying to. Nobody really needs us. It's pretty simple. You just count up the number of hours per day at a station. So, I think that would be one of the better outcomes. And I think Tim has already done that with some of the RAWs across the rest of the West. So I think it's pretty simple, seems useful, and it might be pretty easy to implement in any network that you have.
Okay. And I think we have time for one more question. I apologize because it looks like there are a few more than this, but what types of products were least useful or applied by the fire community?
Oh, so there's one of the papers, and I'm not sure how to add links to a chat or whatever, but Hannah, I can try to figure that out if you want. But the first published, I think the first paper we published is the social science one, and that has a lot of details about that question, like what was used and what wasn't. So I don't want to call any specific thing out, but what I will say is that what you saw was the Weather Service is obviously the hero in this entire exercise. Like the Weather Service is a very trusted source. A lot of stuff is used. That's like the go-to for everything. My memory is, and I have to check myself with my own paper, but my memory is that the academic stuff was pretty low on the list. We didn't ask about a lot of academic stuff, but there was a couple sources in there. And again, from memory, I think it was not necessarily at the top of the pile. It is interesting. There's a table in there where we really sliced and diced what did get used and kind of what didn't. And it's pretty illuminating, especially if you're a producer of stuff. I'd encourage you to go look at that paper.
Thank you, Mike and Dan. We appreciate your time very much. We will also try to help people answer any questions that didn't get answered if we can. In the future, we've recorded them. And now I'm going to pass this on to Clara.
Thank you,
Hannah. The next presentation.
Now we're going to move on to our next one. And let me share the screen. Here we go. So next we're going to hear from our colleagues Tamara Wall, Scott Stearns, and Maggie Eidecker about the red flag warning. Thank you all for being here. We're excited to hear about this work, and go ahead.
All right, I hope everybody can hear me okay and there's no bad echo. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Tamara Wall. I sit at the Desert Research Institute, and just to follow Dan's lead, a little bit about CNAP, the California and Nevada Applications Program. We've been around for just about 25 years, a little bit over. For a long time, it was run by Dr. Kelly Redman, who I'm sure many of you remember, and Dr. Dan Kayan, who was at Scripps, and Kelly was at DRI. Currently, I serve as the lead PI for CNAP, along with my co-PI, Julie Kalansky, who is also at Scripps. With me today, I have our partners from the National Weather Service, Scott Stearns and Maggie Eidecker. But I also want to shout out Nick Nosler and Matt Elliott, who are at the Storm Prediction Center, and Dr. Tim Brown, who is not joining us today because of the changes in scheduling. He threw us over in favor to go to the Predictive Services meeting this week. So unfortunately, we won't have Tim with us today. And next slide. So just a little bit about this project. It's been running for a long time. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, but we're also going to do a little bit of a science talk. I do, however, want to point out really quickly that I think it was in 2013, I was actually interviewing Chuck Maxwell for another project that I was working on, the Fire Danger Pocket Card project. And I was looking at him, and all of a sudden I was like, dude, you're the node. Because I had been hearing about this node in the Southwest, and he just looked at me and he was just like, yes, I am the node. For those of you who know Chuck, you'll know that that was a very Chuck kind of response. Anyway, so I actually figured out who the node was. He did know everybody in this, and still does in the Southwest. But this, the Red Flag Warnings and Fire Weather Watches project is a project very near and dear to my heart. I've been working on it for over 8 years now. For those of you who don't know, Red Flag Warnings and Fire Weather Watches are a product that is issued by the National Weather Service. It's been around for a long time. They literally used to run a red flag up back in the days when it was more of an ad hoc warning at fire stations. Historically, this was kind of an internal product, meant for practitioners. It was used to set staffing levels and for some tactical decision making. Since that time, it's become much more of a public-facing product, and so much of the questions that we looked at were around kind of some of those were the challenges. How much is this a public-facing product, and how much is this a practitioner-based product? All of our work in this presentation is really focused on working with the practitioner community. We haven't done anything with looking at public perceptions of these products at all. Some of the challenges that were initially noted in this project that people had concerns about whether there was no single definition. There was some conflation and concerns if fire weather watches and red flag warnings were really understood to be two separate products. And then there were also issue frequencies and geographical discrepancies across the WFOs. There were some concerns, about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, about overissuance of red flag products. And next slide, please. So in 2018, this project really kind of kicked off with a meeting in Boise. That included CNAP, the National Weather Service fire weather crew that's located in Boise, NIDIS, and the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. All of the funding at that time was coming from CNAP, from the CAP RISA program, as well as some from NIDIS. And so we were really it was really the initial seed funding that we needed to get this project rolling. One of the things that came out of that meeting was that we needed to have another workshop looking at some of the technical aspects, and also that we needed to really get a handle on how many criteria were out there. And we also started looking at if a percentile-based methodology approach was possible or not. You can go ahead to the next slide. So some of the key points that came out of that meeting, that one reason that makes this product such a difficult product is that there is a fuels component. You could have extreme fire weather behavior, but if the fuels are not receptive, then there is no concern. So because the National Weather Service does weather, not fuels, that's always been a huge issue. And every WFO has a slightly different way in how they handle that fuels component in terms of collaborating and consulting with their partners in the wildfire practitioner community. There were a lot of concerns or questions over the timing of weather timescales and severity. If some issuances need to indicate higher levels of severity than others. Again, those public versus fire management needs. And then also some questions about getting rid of the fire weather watch and messaging issues that they were having. So to kind of tackle some of the initial social science questions, if you want to go to the next slide. We actually launched a project in 2020 that was an online survey of fire management practitioners. It really slanted towards the Western US. We did have some responses from other parts of the US, but definitely had a very Western slant. I suspect Chuck Maxwell might have sent it out to a lot of people. The topics that we looked at kind of covered all of those questions, you know, from frequency issues to exceptional events, how the product was used. And we found it was really used to make decisions by the fire management community. It often drove longer lead time for staffing. It turns out the fire weather watch product with that longer lead time was really valuable. It was viewed primarily as a safety product, but it also had implications for public safety as well. And then there were concerns about exceptional severity events. So during that time, we also had an amazing graduate student, Sarah Jacober, and with some C-STAR funding, also from the National Weather Service and NOAA. She had started doing, right about the time the study was going, she started looking into the practicality of taking a percentile approach. Sarah is also an active firefighter in the summers, and she currently is a firefighter again when she finished her master's degree with us at DRI. But she successfully did some of that initial work. And then that allowed all of that initial work to be with some additional funding from the Weather Service through infrastructure bills. We started actually creating the actual matrix, which Maggie is going to talk about now. So the combination of CNAP and DRI, the Storm Prediction Center, and the National Weather Service, particularly the Boise Fire Weather Crew, have been really instrumental in carrying this forward into operations. So Maggie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Maggie. I'm a forecaster at the National Weather Service in Boulder. I joined this project about 2 years ago when I was a pathway student, and the team so kindly let me stay on the project as I converted to a meteorologist here. So going to get into the depths of the product. So this matrix was created based on historical percentiles related to days with extreme fire spread. It includes the standard weather conditions of surface relative humidity and wind speed, but it also, as Tamara said, it includes a fuel indicator, and the fuel indicator is the NFDRS energy release component. Then these surface conditions are converted to historical percentiles and thus converted to a scoring system. And so you can see the scoring system below. The higher scores are meant to translate to an increased potential for red flag warning conditions and issuances. Then in 2022, the Storm Prediction Center joined the core development team, and they created a static product and a way to view the matrix on a static product. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so on the left side of the screen, the static image of the United States and then the shaded areas are the areas that have a value of 11 or greater. And through the research, it was shown that values of 11 through 16 are based off of historical percentiles are good for rapid wildfire spread. So I'm going to use December 30th, 2021 as an example to show you how this matrix product works. And this date is unique, as this is, I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with the Marshall Fire event that happened in Boulder's County Warning Area. And just to give context, Boulder's County Warning Area, or CWA, is the northeast corner of Colorado. So the Marshall Fire happened when we had over 100-mile-per-hour winds, very dry fuels. But what was unique about this event was that our relative humidity values were above our red flag warning criteria, which was 15%, but we had relative humidity values above 20%. So going into an overview of what the matrix showed for that day, I have it zoomed in on the right side. You can see the northeast corner of Colorado. You can kind of go into why this matrix gave a value of 13 for that area where the Marshall event happened. And so what's really nice about this product is being able to see the individual percentiles, and again, seeing why this event was scored a 13 instead of a higher event. So on the top right, you can see the surface wind percentile, and we were in the 98th percentile for winds, and that was for the 100-mile-per-hour plus wind gusts that we had. Then with the ERCs, you can see that we were in the 95th percentile for ERCs, and then when you're looking at the bottom right image, you can see that the surface relative humidity percentiles were only in the 30%. So if we had lower percentiles for relative humidity, we might have seen that value of 13 go into a value of 14, 15, or even 16. So it's really important to not only be able to see the value on the matrix, but then be able to go into each individual percentile and see why the value of 13 was given. And if you can go into the next slide, please. So this is kind of just an overview of the matrix itself, and then I'm going to hone in on the Boulder CWA. So the image on the left is it's just for the year of 2020, but it shows how many days that the fire weather matrix gave a value of 11 or greater for the United States. And you can see that almost the entire United States had at least one day of a value of 11 or greater, which means that at least one of those days had conditions that are conducive for rapid wildfire spread, conditions that could give guidance for a forecaster to issue a red flag warning. And you can also see that in the Western United States, there are a lot more days that had a value of 11 or greater, which makes sense because there's a higher fire danger in the Western United States. Then when you look on the right side, on the right image, you can see there's a lot less days where the fire weather matrix indicated a value of 15 or greater. And again, it has a hot spot in the Western United States due to a higher fire danger in that area. But I wanted to point out that there are a lot less number of days with values of 15 or greater, and that is good to see because you want the values of 15 and the values of 16 are meant only for the days of the most extreme events. So it's looking good with how this matrix is performing, where you have multiple days. On the left, you can see multiple days of conditions that are possible for red flag issuance, but the higher values of 15 or 16, those are reserved for the days that had the most extreme conditions. Then looking at the table at the bottom, so I kind of did a little more specific little project on the Boulder CWA specifically, where I went every day from 2020 through 2024 of the matrix, and I indicated what was the max value that the matrix indicated in the Boulder CWA, which is, again, northeast corner of Colorado. What was the max value and how many days total there were. So within 2020 through 2024, you can see on the right side, there's a total number of days. On average, about a third of the year, the matrix indicated the potential for a red flag warning issuance or red flag warning conditions. And then I also did a little comparison of how many days we had a wildfire reported based off of any size. And you can see that the total number of days of the possibility for red flag warning issuance is higher than the number of days of wildfires reported. But I also want to make sure that it's known that even though conditions are conducive for rapid wildfire spread, we won't always have a fire start. Can you go to next slide, please? Then I compared the matrix with wildfires reported between 2020 and 2024, and I compared that with the probability of detection for our red flag warnings and what is considered a red flag day, which for us, a red flag day is considered when we have surface relative humidity conditions of 15% or less and wind speed or wind gusts of 25 miles per hour or more. So first I want to bring your attention to the graphs on the left. So I divided up the wildfires from 2020 to 2024 into small, medium, and large. Small fires are fires that burned between 100 and 500 acres. Medium wildfires are fires that burned between 500 and 1,000 acres. And then large wildfires are fires that burned over 1,000 acres. So on the top left of the graph, you can see there's a value of 0 and then 11 through 16. The value of 0 is when the matrix did not have a value of 11 or greater in that area that there was a wildfire on that day. So you can see that there are some misses from the matrix with when a wildfire started. However, it is important to note that most of those days that the matrix missed a wildfire day there were a lot of the small fires, which were the 100 to 500 acres. But when you look at the larger values of 13 and to 15, you can see that more of the larger fires were associated with the higher values of the matrix. So you can see the correlation of the higher value of the matrix and the how large the wildfire was. Then looking at the table to the right, so I compared it to how did the matrix detect a value of 11 or greater when the wildfire happened between the years of 2020 through 2024? Did we have a red flag warning out when that fire started on that day? And was that day considered a red flag day? And again, those conditions are if we have dry fuels, relative humidity values of 15% or less, and wind speeds of 25 miles per hour or stronger. So you can see that the matrix had a higher POD than our red flag warnings and red flag day. So that does, you can kind of come to the conclusion that when you base the matrix off of historical percentiles, it did a really good job of detecting the potential for rapid wildfire spread. And then I also wanted to point out that even though there's a small percentage with red flag warnings that we had out when a wildfire happened, and even if we did not issue a red flag warning, we still communicated fire weather concerns to our core partners. And the example again I will show is the Marshall Fire, where we didn't have a red flag warning out because it didn't meet conditions, but we did communicate elevated to critical fire weather concerns. We had a high wind warning out. So we had those fire weather concerns communicated even if we didn't have a red flag warning issued. So that was just a brief overview of the matrix and how it worked with our office. I'm going to hand it off to Scott. I know he was having some internet troubles. So if he's still having internet troubles, I can take over, but I'm going to give him a chance to talk.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You were a little staticky though.
I'm still having some connection issues, so I think you may have to take it, and I'll try to answer any questions if there are any. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries at all. So I'll continue taking over. So right now, this product is not in operational testing. All of these cases we are looking at it in the past. So we haven't tested this product out for any forecasting ability just yet. But in 2024, we did interview 12 NWS WFOs who had mostly archived dates to run in the new product to assess their output in it. So kind of what I just did, but they had 4 specific dates. Or 3 to 4 specific dates. And they were where the matrix suggested an issuance and the WFO did not issue a red flag warning. Another date where a WFO issued a red flag warning, but the matrix suggested no red flag warning issuance. Then they compared a case where the WFO issued a red flag warning and the matrix suggested an issuance. And then we had what we call an exceptional event issuance, where if their CWA had a value of 16, which shows like the most extreme condition. So those interviews covered challenges in issuances, partner communications, date selected, percentile approach perspective, matrix performance, factors influencing issuance, the possible role of the matrix in issuance decision, like would the matrix have helped you? Would the matrix have increased confidence in issuing a red flag warning, or did it help you deter your indication to issue a red flag warning? And then we also interviewed about any partner involvement in issuance decision. If you could go to the next slide, please. So here are the key findings from those interviews and tests. The red flag matrix does show a promise in supporting forecaster confidence in issuance decisions during shoulder seasons and borderline events. So the shift to percentiles was helpful. And this is one of the quotes from one of the forecasters that tested this product. The biggest thing the matrix does for me is just adds that deeper context. So if you're seeing the higher percentiles, then if you're on the fence for a red flag, it would tip me to go ahead and issue it. Another comment or another consensus from the 12 WFOs was that the matrix performs well across regions. The WFOs collaborate with partners before issuance, and that the partners are when they get their fuels information. So WFOs do collaborate with partners before red flag warning issuance, but the involvement level of partners varies widely. So some people utilize their relationship with core partners more than other WFOs. And then another key finding was social media is used heavily to disseminate red flag warnings to the public. If you could go to the next slide, please. And then we asked for how could we improve this product, and this is the consensus of what we got from the interviews. In cases where the matrix overperformed, i.e. the green up for ERCs, or if the ERCs were lagging, we should instead use rolling seasonal averages for percentiles rather than annual. We should increase output time, and we should move to a higher resolution grid from a 4 kilometer to a 2.5 kilometer grid. Another improvement we could try was the map-based product. So we could overlay it with the Canadian fire danger rating system. So overlay it with our matrix and the fuel data. We can incorporate a wind gust component because right now we do not have that. And then everyone wants more easily available, accurate, and utilizable fuel conditions data. Next slide. And so looking forward, based on that, we're continually evaluating forecast output utility for potential operational use. This framework has proven useful, but we have some data compatibility hurdles to overcome. We'll be further working with WFO forecasters on additional testing again this year. And the intent was and is to operationalize forecast guidance that combines fire weather and fuels into one result. And the resultant number can be used to inform relative severity independent of location. So this product was not meant to be a one step in your deciding factor of issuing a red flag warning. It's more of a guidance product and a confidence booster. And I believe that is the last slide. Yes, that is the last slide. So yeah, Britt, take it back to, I believe, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Maggie. I appreciate it. Maggie and Tamara and Scott, even though Scott wasn't able to get on there. Maggie, you did a great job getting in there and explaining it all for him. Much appreciated. Do we have any, if anybody has any comments and you want to put them in the Q&A, I have a comment. I think it might be for Tamara, or a question, questions, and comments, either one. And that is, as this has evolved over time, the work with the red flag warning system, how has your work from the academic perspective and the perspective of the initiation of it sort of changed? So I know it sounds like maybe there has been an evolution of how CNAP has been involved with what's going on, and I'm just curious as to how that's worked and what you see as being some things that you all have learned along the way in that process.
I think so. Yeah, CNAP has always evolved, right? It launched the initial, seed funding that gave us the ability to kind of start understanding, for example, that I had a graduate student that spent an entire summer. He called every WFO, got their annual operating plan, and identified over 500 unique red flag criteria. And just that number kind of really was like, everybody was like, oh, this is an issue. Like, we need to figure out how to standardize this. And that there was also lots of concerns about if there's like one de facto product every WFO had to use, that wouldn't represent the geographic and the weather differences that are across the nation. So we spent a lot of time thinking very carefully about how to standardize this product, but still give people, the opportunities to recognize their own geographic idiosyncrasies. So that was, and happily that did not turn that student off from research. He's currently doing a PhD. Anyway, I was super relieved.
That's good. They're going to need that.
Yeah.
for
he was very
successful
meticulous.
research.
Yeah, it was great.
A bunch of questions just came in, so I'll cut mine off. And we only have a few minutes. We really only have 1 minute left. But how did you decide how to weigh the components of the matrix? Do some components weigh more heavily than others? And I think, either one of you, but Maggie maybe.
That's a really good question. I wonder if Scott is on. He might have a better answer than I do. I'm going to wait to see if he's on.
Yeah, can you all hear me right now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. So no, essentially they all have equal weighting. So there is a scoring system that Maggie highlighted, based on percentile, so climatology data. But each of those individual pieces of the scoring system have equal weighting. So hopefully that answers your question succinctly.
We are right at 3, so I'm trying to figure out if we have any additional time, because I think the next question is actually really good. Have you tested this product with any potential users that would need to understand how this product is put together, such as utilities? And could this influence how they approach power distribution? This is also Dave Jones from the Storm Center Communications.
I could chip in. The answer is no. Because it is an internal product. It would be internal to the National Weather Service. That does, however, I think raise an important point is, if, we are successful in moving this product into operations fully, does giving that number out or giving access to the matrix guidance to some of those core partners, would that be beneficial for them?
Thank you so much, Tamara, Maggie, Scott. We have come to the end of our time. We are recording the rest of the questions, so I'm going to pass this over to Clara to close it up. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and everybody who participated. Clara?
Thank you so much, and thanks to everybody who submitted questions. That was really great. We are going to close the webinar now, but I will put on the screen just some resources if you'd like to learn more about this series, if you'd like to learn more about the Climate Program Office or Forest here at NOAA. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for their great presentations and for participating in this webinar. So thanks very much. Feel free to engage with us at the resources on the screen, and we hope to see you at another event. Thanks so much.